Tissues? 우리 있는 단어가 너무 비싸. 너무 좋은 사이에서 공부해서 써왔다가 영상 디스트 상. So we'll start with the preliminary elements, expelling the stale winds, focusing on our motivation, giving rise to the proper motivation, followed by the prayers, the supplication prayers that this week. It's a one-page prayer that was being passed around. 뭐 불선 맞이해 보거나 맞에 세력 도매게 싸게 얘네 비과당 얘네 들어봐 대낭인 얘네 다 말한 저와당 타바당 못 받아서 다음 얘네 다 지금 왔어요 애니 녀가 얘네 다양하다 도대체 가르쳐 얘네 다 녀명이지 막 계획 아시겠지 상하고 싶다 맞지 So before engaging in receiving teaching, contemplating on teaching, to now think from beginningless time, whatever negativity, whatever obscurations we've amassed, whatever negativity there may be in our mind, as well as the hindrances to meditative practice, dullness of mind, laxity of mind, torpor, sleepiness, along with all afflictive emotions. Namely, everything that can bring an obstacle or obstruction, a hindrance to our spiritual training has been completely cleansed away, purified, is gone. So right now, following our first part of that Lumro cell, now to perceive in that way that all of it's been completely eliminated.
Voilà, so ini ta yang ngaran chu ta ngo ma so ona ngo yo zhu xie ji la ta tre ini sanji ini ta shagya to ba ini ta sanji bi ini ji so ini ta orang kata ni yom ini ta cengara tu ya ini layu lah ini jeba lah ini zeke ini orang kecil tu ini ta misal ta yom katin saya kecil ini yom lah tulen jaya kecil ini layu tu pepsi ini yom lah ta dah som lah cuci ini yom yang ini ngaran tu deba tongje ini dah想就 tongje ini yang lari yang ini dah yang ngaran tu ini ya ini ayo jibo dera ini masuk je yang lari yang ini dah makin senje cedo ini yang lari mah 바바가 되더니 제가 샤스 토모딩이 투철 쳐서 뭐 그러시네.
So before we begin our teaching for today, I'd like to let you all know of the unique special occasion that is today. Today is in Tibetan what we call Labap Duchen, the holiday or festival of the descent from the heavens, literally. So it's the anniversary, the celebration of the of Shakyamuni Buddha, who after attaining complete enlightenment saw, his clairvoyance saw that his mother, who had passed away, had been reborn in the God realms, in a heavenly realm. So for her sake, he traveled there, really, in order to repay her kindness, as an act of gratitude towards the kindness of his mother. He went to visit her and to teach her the Dharma, and remained in that heavenly realm with her for 3 months, teaching her the Dharma and guiding her to see directly the true nature of reality. So her seeing the true nature of reality, she gained enlightenment herself. And then instead of just staying merrily in that heavenly realm, the Buddha descended back down to the earth for the sake of all old mother-like sentient beings, to act for the welfare of them. So today, what we call Labap Duchen is the anniversary of this celebration of the annual festival commemorating and celebrating that act of the Buddha. So before we started, Rinpoche wanted to let you all know that.
Ini sonda trending around the nangwa kita America kali generation sore. Ini sonda ini karasar. Ini oleh yang itu jelas. Ini sonda ini ama tamjena. Ini yang ini flash television. America zone, 나라도 소소 아미 zone, 내 중에 아마 담지 참아라 그냥 다 못하겠다.
So because of that, this particular festival or Buddhist holiday really is like the Buddhist Mother's Day, the Buddhist day commemorating the great kindness and celebrating with gratitude our mothers. So because of that, because today is a Buddhist Mother's Day, Rinpoche wants to extend a particular tashidalik, auspicious wishes to all mothers. In particular, focusing on our own mothers of this life, our own mothers, but also auspicious wishes to all mother beings.
Happy Mother Day. Yeah, ini yang ada mother yang so ini mau be amatam che. Debe amatam che. Yang ada mau be amatam che.
So happy Mother's Day, not just to current mothers, but to our mothers of the future, those beings that will be our mothers and will be mothers. Not just those beings, but the mothers of the past, those beings that have been our mothers in the past. So to all mother sentient beings.
Ini misalnya, orang tu Amerika, China. 야, 사실 시켰다 봐게요. 아마라 가빈 소야 저거데 취시에도와. 나라는 게 속에다 드레인 나라는 게 아니야. 취시야. 아니. 고갑데. 미세게 침을 했어. 근데야 뭐 얘기는 되지 요래다. 또 내가 앞으로 하게 చేయ면도 하실 때니 그래 때니 뭐가 보이나 다 샤리그 보이는 드리젤의 찍을 송과 제 인사요. 다
Magdalene.
다 가래에서는 아니 마기 이렇게 가라서 정했어야 생긴. 마가리 침몰. 마기 정했어야 생긴. 근데 배더니 와서 데레스 배더니
Trillion Sape Dosi.
아니 정했어 빈도 이제
Brennan Sarpe?
말아 정했지도 있어요. 아마도 정했지도 섭도. 어디는 들으지도 다 아마도서 가레스긴 가렌스도 그래스. 너. 얘네 다 빼는 말한지 다 맞지. 강에 잡혀. 다 지가서 로마지야요. 얘는 빼는 데다 말아도 아마도 개발로 horne. 얘네 말한지 빼든 잠불래는 꼬와 잡아 잠지. 얘네 대잠지게 얘네 말한지 얘네 다 얘네 대시 잡이네요. 아미트는 세트 말해서 내가 나도 아마도 비와서 드리실까. 얘나요. 그네들 가르치고 그랬어나. 얘는 추대고 그랬어. 니가 그때는 동안 세트가 맞아. 가서 그 아니 장조도야. 제가 대산 챙겼다 봐야 될 때는 아마라. 얘는 추대 앞에 와. 그때는 말한 속에야 다 얘는 추대다. 야, 마게 생겨 담지 아니다. 아메게 조지에 됐더니 다 빠져서 마주지 생겨 담지 산지제 공부 커버자. 대체도 나도 추냐, 추곰, 추드롭 소리에도 제 그냥데. 그런 거라서 믹스하게 네 양만 저래 그런 들었지. 네 사다보나.
So today on our Buddhist Mother's Day, a day of commemorating and repaying the kindness of mothers. So the Buddha Shakyamuni did this primarily by teaching the Dharma, by sharing the Dharma with his mother. That was his means for repaying her kindness. So Rinpoche says that, so today too, he gets to be here, has this opportunity to share on the teachings of Dharma. So that's particularly important and significant. So there's a sutra called something like the Repaying of the Kindness of Mothers Sutra. Something like that. We didn't remember exactly, but we think something like that. So in this sutra, it talks about the great kindness of mothers, what mother beings go through for their offspring, the difficulties they endure, their being of benefit to their offspring. And then ask the question of how is it that what would equal the repayment of such kindness of mothers? What can you try to do? How can you help mothers to repay that tremendous debt of kindness? So it goes through some examples, one of which is if you were to carry your elderly mother on your back and walk around the whole earth, with your mother on your back, even such effort as that wouldn't come close to repaying the great kindness of mothers. And goes on in this way, and then comes to poses the question of, well, then what is it that repays the kindness? Mothers, what can actually do it? It is solely the sharing of Dharma, through the teaching of the Buddha Dharma, that degree of kindness can be repaid, because it's through the Dharma that not only all temporary suffering, the immediate experience of suffering of mother-like beings can be eliminated, but ultimately all forms of suffering can be completely eliminated through the Dharma. So the sutra goes on teaching like that. So it's because of that that this is what the Buddha Shakyamuni demonstrated in his example of going to the God realms to teach his mother the Dharma. And then returning to teach all sentient beings the Dharma, all mother-like, old mother sentient beings the Dharma. So in relation to this, Rinpoche is kind of telling this story, bringing this up in this context of our engendering the proper motivation of bodhicitta. That in particular today, to think of all mother-like sentient beings, to bring to mind this idea of repaying the kindness of greatly kind mothers. And that with that as your purpose, to listen to teachings, contemplate teachings, meditate on teachings, whatever form of spiritual training it is you're engaging in, that it's for that purpose, for the purpose of all mother beings to attain complete enlightenment. So now contemplate for a bit on your motivation in this way.
다 배낭행스 얘네 다 말한 다 아주 생제 제바장 맞지 얘네 다 말아도 됐다 얘네 지다 말아서 무슨 지금 독트야다 얘네 제발도 다 들은 값서 양 로죠 얘네 다르바 뭐다 송제 얘네 다 들은 거는 또 같이 거기도만 얘네 소다다 얘네들 얘네 거르베게 동네 얘네 다 말하는 저거 벌쳐서 얘네 야 시시 얘네 다 되게 되는 동네 얘네 말하는 저거 아니 저기서 달게 빵 소리도 제가 또 쇼사 맞는데 다들 말하는 저거야 손답대다 소왔다 뭐는 자 되는 거 좀 쓰고 있어
So in that way, giving rise to the proper motivation, engendering our intention. So we've given rise to this intention, our motivation, and it can't just be left there. We need to strive to actually accomplish this. So right now our means for doing that is the training and the practice of Lojong, mind training. So we've concluded the section on impermanence, the contemplation on impermanence, and now have arrived at the section on Lojong as it relates to the contemplation on the sufferings of samsara. So while having in our mind being cognizant of the sufferings of samsara, we'll now recite these prayers, make supplication prayers and aspiration prayers, thinking in our mind, being cognizant of the sufferings of samsara, and making prayers that are primarily praying that we can perfectly accomplish the abandoning and engaging in relation to the causes that lead to suffering, namely perfectly abandon all causes that lead to suffering. So now we'll recite these prayers and have this in your mind, this type of aspiration and supplication. First in English. Kind and precious Root Guru, I pray to you. Bless me with your qualities from knowing the suffering of samsara that will arise in my mind stream. Knowing the activities of samsara are without essence, you solely endeavor with great compassion for the welfare of others. Without clinging to existence or peace, you act in accord with the Mahayana tradition. Incomparable Guru, at your feet I prostrate. While seeing the suffering of samsara, I still have clinging and attachment. Although I am terrified of the abyss of the lower realms, I still engage in non-virtue. Myself and those like me, sentient beings on errant paths, bless us to sincerely renounce the things of this life.
Samsanya Jejong, whatever thing would have to Chaba, according to Lama Jibedani Bangolama and the Shabjip in the Dorchmame Pala, was some Kubachi Bangola, the Kobe Chata worship to Washington of the so Javagunju and the Diet, Kaza Meleka Barabirba, turning to be some Lama Nama, which are trees along the Chukumbami or 3 years along the channel, they visit no broken ground. Kunche chuja bola chan zaren chembe shivza kunje pening zai tukte ozer dubde pardo shena salam titit tem basam de pa engin jingme ning balla cha kinen zong kinen so songde nangwen de taram go kala kadan de pa tatin ba jingme jerim yo gola ko cha char che dere jebe se ko shwa ma de tube wong yo shwa talam pam ju sumaran ru jingme chuja wang bola ko cha char chuje de pa ron ngang de she ujir mo kada yin so yer du ba chimbe ni no som zai do tembe ni mala ko cha samjo tingam no yen mala ko da chuke tam ba lo je pa yen me ma ka wang por so lo de ni yen me de pa sing je lo kada chuni bom ba no de chu de na yi shi ta shi ni ba ta jen no de do je Origin Jujola, Chara, the Rinpoche James Jesus, on limit to be an accusation there, and maybe some project. Jimmy Chente was a la Pujas, Nilo, whatever a shingilo. Well, as a tat, rain of June, Peneta, Savik is the name of June, Rambane, that rain somebody. 다 숨바데 아니 가르사 포로익 아니 동하나 삼바 포르테스
Our main topic for today. The third section, the third topic of Lojong mind training, which is the contemplation on the suffering of samsara.
네, 다 말한제 아니 다 데라스 아니 다 동하나스인데 삼바 데라야 제르 코로도 동하 제라 삼바 제가 좋아하는 거 동하 소소나 삼바 남바 니리란다 다랑에 하고 제르 때나 대시유연스
So then, for our contemplation on the suffering of samsara, we have two subsections how to do this. So we have the initial contemplation on the general sufferings, kind of universal sufferings of samsara, followed by the contemplations on the individual experiences of suffering of individual beings, namely within the 6 realms of existence. So of those two, we'll start first with discussing the general or the universal sufferings of samsara.
그래서 얘네 다 지던 게 얘네 다 말하면서 남자도 또 산이 찾아도 봐요. 얘네 다 갑대라. 얘네 다 내다 이거 얘네 자그를 진짜 알았어요. 얘네 세상스이 생
Gyabodegi Tsen.
세
Gyabodegi Tsen.
야 얘네 세 예마tam지 마세 얘네 그런 자그 자식라야 맞소게 얘네 자식 중지 얘네 맞소 자식 좀 코르제바 자식 중비 얘네 맞소 중대 올라서 다 던지게 되네 특급라스 얘네 말한도 쓰바 호르게 되지 랑지 따거든 호랑게 되네 다 빼는 제세래 호랑게 빼 호랑 난도 참 많이 봐 호랑게 치려더니 이게 니당 한래 여가 섞여져 아니 하시라더니 제가 제와 하시 나와 하시 쉬와 하시 비바라 속에는 동할 망고 이제 섞여 아니 다 인고 매바치 자식이라야 인고 매바치 섞여 아니 다 예스야. 아니 많이 주제. 얘네 다 나는 다 인지스킨 로직들이 요래서 아니야랑 가르사. 얘네 뭐가 진짜 뭐야? 예. 얘네 신나게 나왔다. 그래서 배치서 얘네 패치잖니. 얘네 다 정성도 배치. 얘네 다 되는데. 얘네 공제진 오다 도스킨 산지랑이 장 당분 추를 하래서 주거래서는 동화들 이렇게 와서 추를 하래. 지금 로직 상황을 그래요.
To our own teacher, the Buddha of our time, Shakyamuni. Shakyamuni was alive. He was born as a prince, born as the son of a king, the heir apparent, the crown prince. He had received all the power, the administrative power of the king. He had his ministers, his retinue, his wife, his family. And even having all this, he was able to recognize the nature of samsara, of cyclic existence, as being without essence, remaining in his palace, and then also looking at the situation of other beings outside his palace walls, going out of his palace, seeing other beings, namely experiencing birth, sickness, death, old age, witnessing this, his direct seeing the situation of others. He gained this recognition that anywhere in cyclic existence, be you a crown prince or whatever, samsara itself has no essence, is without intrinsic meaning. And it was by seeing this directly that then he renounced his kingdom, cut his hair, and escaped off into the forest, and met the great sages, the rishis of the time, received teachings from them, and trained extensively in meditative concentration, samadhi, and so forth. So the life story of the Buddha himself also displays this fact that initially, in order to engage properly the Dharma, to enter into the Dharma, first you see suffering, directly seeing suffering, then having witnessed the suffering, seen it, then you're propelled to go into the Dharma.
Any 대값서 any 당가는 주고 배 any unique demba on some 어제 any 다 뭐가야라 타마 any 산지에 이별.
So then there are many different parts to the story of what progressed from there for the Buddha. The general story is that he engaged in great austerities for 6 years, focusing on samadhi, training in meditative concentration, which eventually led him to, through different stages, led him to gaining the full realization of the truth of dharmata, the realization of the true nature of reality, seeing it just as it is. So, which he attained while remaining in Bodh Gaya, India, and upon that gained complete enlightenment, Buddhahood.
얘네 다 대답을 했더니 다 상지네 얘네 다 주니 무슨도 제가요 얘네 다 양 얘게 상지게 동문도 때 하고는 와 제장 다 대값을 때는 다 지나라는 저거 호랑이 똑같이 얘한테는 시야군에 시야사를 올려놓으라고 했더니 얘가 말에 쇼에 말에 얘네 상지게 다 소말 다 홍그 똑같 다 배리기서는 아니 다 지금 말하는 저 아니 삼진을 잡았더니 예제 늦었다고 그러니까 휴지 뽀송 이나요 다 술을 희한해한테 고사민도 근데 제한민도 소는 근데 말이야 그냥 근데 다 신나는 팩트제는 그냥 고민진 근데 욕해버렸어
So the Buddha, having attained Buddhahood, complete enlightenment, through the direct, or seeing directly the true nature of reality just as it is, and not knowing if others would be able to gain this complete enlightenment, not able to see that, then thought that there is no one to teach this to, no being that this can be shared with. This realization that I've found, this spiritual realization of complete enlightenment, which is inconceivable beyond the conceptual mind. This Amrita-like nectar, this nectar-like realization that I have found, no one will understand if I try to share it with them. Then thinking in this way, that there was nobody to share this with, he went back off into the forest to meditate.
아미다 생일이다 가려서 나 나랑 또 배나 아니 동안 그 숨을 담게 아니 서야 아니 배치서 내가 다지 서투야 그랬으니까 또 배니 가당 나랑 좀 취자치 뭐지 근데 니에브로와 어때서 아니 대야 가서 다 라데서 아니 뭐시 시제 근데 다 와이 저고 때문에 말아서 아니 참과다 아니 다 가서 이 드라마다 아니 다 가디셔다 됐어 아니 됐어도 아니 다 말아 조금 막 아니 펼치지 근데 상기라 동가고 아니 다 참과기 홀로 있어요 홀로 세기야봐 근데 나도 디아기도 동가고 네 다당하는 저 안에 대해서 가르쳐주는 허지에는 아니 최소로 제스다 다치는 것은 최소로 제스는 정말 쉬워 거치 아니 다당하는 저거 아니 와라나스라 합치지 근데 당고 되는 말하는 저거 아니 뭐마 말아 근데 다 멤버지 최소로 그래서 드라잉 상지를 미세트체 손가락 드라잉 상지를 능게들 짜게 그래서 상지가 제래나 냠도 드라잉이야 추가돼요 근데 대세시는 직시야나 야고도 상도 대소가 어때는 대세시는 상지가 추도 추된 나와데 다 담고 가르나 버렸어요 그래서 내가 이겼어 내가 다 담고 가르쳐送 그랬잖아. 동화를 해버자. 그때 가서 다 동화를 통도 봐. 제가 산지에 추 당고대 대랑에도 되네. 가르쳐. 아니, 다 동화를 해버자. 군종 빵을 자스. 아니 고파 어디 자스 남줄라 템버자스 다때 처리 예가 돌아더니 도스케티네 내마이 추주 콜로 생에다 직대라 슈 당도 성과데 데레스
This nectar, like Amrita, Dharma have I found. So Amrita or nectar here really means like medicine. This medicine like Dharma have I found. The medicine that clears away all pain, all torment of suffering of samsara. The sacred Dharma, that's what the Buddha is referring to here. This nectar have I found. So he says this, and then he's remaining off in the forest. Then the gods, through their clairvoyant psychic powers, knowing what he had attained, come down to see him, the king of all gods, Indra, Brahma, and Ishvara, and so forth, come down to visit the Buddha and make offerings to him. Indra offering the his eight-spoked wheel, Brahma offering the white conch, and so forth. Making these offerings, and they request the Buddha to teach, to turn the wheel of the Dharma, to teach the Dharma. This was the first requesting of the Dharma to be propounded in the world. So then, based on having been requested, on receiving this request, then the Buddha went to traveling around, ended up in Varanasi, where he gave his first teaching of the Dharma, teaching to the 5 noble disciples, his first 5 disciples. And he taught them the 4 noble truths. So, we're going through this history of the Buddha Shakyamuni, in part because it relates directly to our discussion of our topic today, sufferings of samsara, but also it's this Duchen, this unique festival, the annual festival celebration of the Buddha Shakyamuni. Sort of bring that in and relate it to our teachings. Rinpoche wanted to discuss a little extensively the life of the Buddha and relate the teaching of today to the life of the Buddha, to remind us of him and his teaching. So, the Buddha gave this teaching of the 4 noble truths. First of which is, the first thing the Buddha said was, understand suffering. You need to understand suffering. Know suffering. This was the first Dharma that the Buddha taught, the first teaching he gave. Know suffering. Then he continues with abandon the source of suffering. Is the second of the 4 noble truths. And the third, attain cessation. Attain the cessation of suffering is the third. And then the fourth is rely upon the path in your mind stream. So these are the 4 noble truths which sum up the first teachings that the Buddha Shakyamuni gave.
동말 마시나 동말 뽕야게 되니 가르쳐야 되는 거야. 좀 노래 제마. 그랬더니 되니 당부 동할때 쉬고 동할때 쉬나 동할때 되니 니바들 쓰고 군용 보아자서 오늘 동할때 가르치는 교래서 그 주대 가르쳐서 딱 되시고 주대 쉬나 아니 맞아 아니 주대 맞아 되는 배드께서 아니 앙도르게
So if we don't have a recognition or an understanding of suffering, we don't first know suffering, then a mind intent on abandoning suffering can't come about. So it's necessary that first you have this recognition, this knowledge of suffering. And then second, you can then it leads directly into the abandoning the source of suffering. So initially, we recognize suffering. We know that there is a suffering. And why is there suffering? Where does this suffering come from? what exactly is the source and what are the causes that lead to the experience of suffering? So it leads just like that. Right? So then these causes, and then once we know these the causes, what are the sources that lead to suffering, only then can we know what it is to be engaged in and what it is to be abandoned, how we should be acting.
다 내가 드린 가서 군용 뽑았지 않았어요. 다 군용대 요대 군용 영어가 되는 중앙 학교에 아니 요대 아니 말하면 저 아니 왕자나 아니 양 요대 매나 동아리 오면 와 어이 다 내가 드린 가서 다 오나 뭐가 뭐도 지나야 같이 하고 그래서 다 지금 뭐구나 요즘 뭐구나 아니 남짓을 해서 가서다 줄을 떼고 그래서 남 줄을 떼서는 아니 다 가르쳐 다 디그 빼는 니한테 빼나 아니 다 말하는 저거 싸봐 중징도 쳐도 아니 맞아 누가 빵투야
차원 중심.
싸원
중심이 차원이.
내한테 이제 두고 열어서도 아니 다 말하는 좀 아니 내가 뽑았어 대집에 탑대다 다 가다더니 남선에 딱 탑대로와 탑대로 와서 주세를 넣어와 주세를 다 말하는 좀 빼는 사람들이 다 말하는 조금 넘어가다 보니 다 주지 왕제 탑대 이래 다 말하는 좀 됐어요. 라임스
So you are to abandon the basis, the foundation, the basis that leads to suffering, which is the afflictive emotion. So understanding that it is, or knowing that it is the afflictive emotions that are the cause that leads to suffering, then they can be abandoned. Having abandoned the basis, having abandoned the cause that leads to something, then what that cause leads to can't come about. So having abandoned the causes that lead to suffering, then how could suffering ever come about? There will be no suffering. So having abandoned all the causes that lead to suffering, then cessation, namely cessation of suffering, is to be directly manifest, the third truth. And if you're after reaching this cessation of suffering, then the path needs to be relied on as the cause that leads to that. And the path is like an antidote. The antidote that can completely uproot the causes that lead to suffering. Like to cut down a tree, completely uprooting the whole tree, cutting all the roots out. So that is what the path is, or also what we call the Dharma. The Dharma presents the skillful means that lead to the direct realization of cessation, the third noble truth. The Dharma is that which shows us how to abandon the afflictive emotions. Directly shows how to abandon the afflictive emotions, all the causes that lead to the experience of suffering, which is also synonymous with the path.
그래서 다 동화를 생겼는데 빼나 되는 거라는 소리 내다 나 주들은 나차요 빼나 아니 말하는 다 다체 땅 아니 다 말하는 걸 나차다 빼나 차도복 그랬더니 나차지게 하거나 다 대말하는 거다 맞아 당보다 희용과 다들 동아시 다니 독도 치나 레바도 로나 아니 맞아서 시그래 다들 하고 다들 내가 하이를 침몰에 다들 해봐도 소나 민가나 다 주고 싫어. 왜? 다들 싫나? 다들 가르쳐주는 영어네. 그래봐. 다들 직지나 알아통잡. 직지나 담아통잡 염색을 때는 쪽에. 직지나 알아통잡. 다들 주대 데려도 봐. 다들 운동도 갖고서 운동. 아래 다 이해되는 게 매서나 이게 까봐야 나왔어. 다들 까봐야 양한테 까고 마치 근데 땅 알아주고 빨리 죽하래. 로고도 니만이라 마야들이 뭐 깡파 잡지는 로. 근데 양 알아도 바뀌어. 다양 두스 제바이나. 아니 내 주보대 양 과수디 나사들 막 착해. 내 상황 영토도 봐. 쉬워. 다티 그냥 알아서 아니. 때렸다 나서 아니. 운용 비슷하다. 운용 빼는 마치 주로. 까나 아니 얘기 때문에 내 상황 뭐 봐. 쉬고. 때려 고방. 다티 쟤는 같이 해 버려. 나서 빵은 끼고도 와라. 빵은 주더라 빵은 끼고. 초지는 내 주쟁인데 땅에 가서 알아통해도 바뀌어. 초진이 맞은 투자를 들어보고도 알아주고 빼는 내내 공부 좀 할래. 내내 알아주고 빼줬어. 대체는 내내 대상대 아니 지금 제 토이 봐. 딱 두스. 다들 내가 있으니까 방송 동안에 시해봤지. 동안시나 대주듯이. 저대 빵하지? 저대게 되는 말안 듣고 빵은 아니 동할 때도 내와도 뒤에 제바나 되는 말안 듣고 가르치는 거리서는 되네 다 랑도르돼서 만화가 땡고도 못 어디다 대만 되는데.
So, suffering. We can use an analogy to understand this teaching of the Four Noble Truths. Make it clear. So the experience of suffering, the first noble truth, is like having some type of illness. You have some sickness in the body, some disease, some problem in your body. So if you're sick, you have some illness, then the first thing that has to happen is you have to get an examination or check out the situation. So through examining your body, then you discover something's amiss, something's not right. Maybe you have high blood pressure. So that's like the first noble truth. I have this ailment. I have high blood pressure. So then knowing that, then I have high blood pressure. If this gets any worse, then it goes to my brain. I'll have a stroke. I could die. It could lead to a heart attack. So really, it's extremely dangerous, this precarious, where I'm at right now, having this sickness of high blood pressure. So then next, you say, okay, so I have this. I'm fully aware of the suffering of this high blood pressure, this sickness. What in the world did it come from? What's the cause that led to this? Maybe I drink too much. Okay, so it's from all the booze. Maybe I smoke too much. Then Rinpoche said, no, it's I drink too much. That's definitely the cause. It's way too much alcohol. So now we know the source. That's what has led to this situation that needs to be dealt with. Well, if the source is dealt with, then there will be the cessation of the high blood pressure. And the cessation of the high blood pressure, then I'll have my health back. My body will be at ease, healthy again. Well, how do we get to that? We need to go jogging every day, get rid of this alcohol, and exercise a lot. So then that's the Four Noble Truths. So, just like this, right? So initially we recognize, you examine the body, you see what's wrong with it, you have some illness, you look into the source of it, what has led to this. Having understood that, then you recognize abandoning the source will no longer lead to the illness, the disease, high blood pressure in this case. That state of cessation is a state of health. Your body is back good. So then there is a litany of things that need to be done, engaged in order to accomplish that cessation. Here, no more drinking, jogging, exercising. Once that's done, the body is healthy again. So that perfectly parallels the teaching of the Four Noble Truths. Knowing suffering, understanding the cause that leads to suffering, knowing that the abandoning of that, reaching cessation, is suffering will be relinquished and a state of well-being, happiness will be attained, and that will be achieved through unerringly engaging in what it is to be engaged in and abandoning what it is to be abandoned.
장가란 속에 동안 시급이 김선시하지 기도하는 게 낫대로 다 자당가도 먼저 뭐 비우라고 해나 다다들 동안 시하기도 다 되게 제일 잘 시하기로서는 준준 시하기도 가서 방용 내 준비 다 되는 거는 좀 다 좀 아니 다 문제 원래 다 진짜 물어야 얘기는 그래서 얘네 근데 성당에서 다 당고 얘네 동할게 마시를 거나 동할 시급이 좀 세야지 다 동할 공부를 다 제르르서 얘네 말하는 것도 동할 생인데 얘네 허위게 되는 나와 다지 농첩적으로 차들이요 다 되나 얘네 동할 때 얘네 다 제대로 거는 걔나 가서 얘네 넘버 20 버리기 다 지가라 또 배나 얘네 랑징게 또 마시고 와 랑징게 또
시
랑징게 또 얘네 동할게 동할 요래 동할 차바도 제제 동할 또 동할이 제시야
So that's kind of the reasoning behind why initially you're to have this understanding of suffering, to know suffering. That's the premise. So generally in teaching on preliminary practices, Ngondro and Lojong teachings, this is the progression, that first we focus on suffering, the teachings on suffering. And then second, following the teachings on suffering, you have the teachings on karma, cause and effect, which explicitly put out what it is that needs to be engaged in and what it is to be abandoned in relation to karma and how karma and cause and effect work. So first so now we understand the reasoning behind this, why it is we're to know suffering. So now suffering itself, what exactly are we talking about with suffering? So generally suffering, when we talk in general terms about suffering, suffering is said to pervade everywhere of cyclic existence. All samsara is pervaded by suffering, pervaded by the four types of suffering, often what we call the four types of suffering, which are natural suffering, the suffering of change, and the suffering of everything composite, or the suffering of all conditioned things.
Suffering. Tungal ki tungal.
Didn't I say
Tungal ki tungal.
it? Dangure rangshing ki dunga.
Ngoni ki tungal, jurwe tungal, chapatu shi ki tungal, tamat tungal ki tungal.
Tamade dunga.
Tungal ki tungal. Rumi tamat tungal song song.
Okay.
Shi tungal nagumina.
I mixed up the order. So like the intrinsic suffering or natural suffering, and then the other ones, suffering of change, and then the suffering of all composite things, and then suffering of suffering. What?
That's 다 라hingi 동안 세도 답서 다다 말한 수치 동안 나오지 그 여자로 그 매자로 강한테를 다 거기 내리면서 탐지 근데 지 라hingi 이니가 좀 벌써 애니 지 따나 되네 참아 지금 알아서 그 아니 동안에 지금 많이 버려 그랬어.
So the nature of suffering or natural suffering, this first one, or intrinsic suffering, any of those, just pick which one you like. So right now, in this moment, wherever one may be in any of the classes of samsara, any of the levels of samsara, suffering can directly manifest in the next moment. Right now, it's ready to directly manifest or ready to not directly manifest an experience of suffering. But there's this like ever-present potential of that. And it's also that there's nowhere within samsara that transcends suffering, transcends the potential of suffering arising in any moment.
그래서 지방의 동아리 생인데요. 대화는 뜨니 동아리야. 대화는 뜨니 동아리 뜨니 대화.
Generally, when we talk about suffering, it's defined based on being compared to, or defined in relation to happiness or well-being. Because there's happiness or well-being, then we have suffering. Because there's suffering, then there's well-being. So it's this, in contrast to the other.
다 뒤나라도 다다 빼는 지가 대화라 지가도 다 다지 뜨게 저로 빼는 다 나랑 저거 아니 다 가자라는 지 시험이 아니 가르쳐 버려 빼는 다 나랑 저거 또 대화라고 지 값이나 가라라고 지를 하나 대화지 자꾸 봐 대화를 해서 얘나야 다 코랑 인게 대화라고 지나 가세 세장 대도 좀 보고 양 때는 가서 페이스리 컨퍼런스에서야 가서 애니 마음속나 양 나사로 보나 근데 양 나라서 마대와지 차긴 도와줘
Generally speaking, suffering, it's always in comparison to some type of state of happiness. Always based on our perception of happiness. What would be happiness? One kind of example of this. Meaning that it's a contingent thing, not definitively true or inherently true. So say the other day you were starving, you're super hungry. So when you're really hungry, food is like the true happiness. If you're really hungry, you're thinking, if I just had this food, then everything would be okay, I'd be happy. But it's just based, contingent upon that current situation of being hungry. There's no true existence of happiness in food. Food is not intrinsically happiness, definitively happiness. Because you get your food and then for a moment you're happy, but if food was truly happiness, truly well-being, then however much food you were to eat, your happiness could only increase, which is definitely not the case. You're really hungry and you start eating, and as soon as you've eaten too much, then immediately your stomach hurts, leads to all kinds of problems. Then what was, you projected as, that's happiness if I have that, has now become the source of your suffering.
양 빼는 가다 나서 다 가면은 사바대 있을 동안 주얼 마음으로는 강모한테 대만을 통거. 양 깔마 가실 고고 말해. 양 마한테 렌서 동안에 전 야 나는 지금 제 대만을 하지. 제가 다 거기서 지금 내가 연나 근데 코 대만을 내고 코 항상 요즘 와. 제가 될 때는 코를 힘이 대만에 내면
Right now in here it's getting a little warm. Maybe if I go outside, that'd be nice. It's cooler outside. Probably wouldn't take more than a couple minutes before we're uncomfortable outside. I gotta go back inside. It's warmer inside. Point being that all these things we call happiness, they're just very transient, malleable states of well-being, conditions that are not at all like intrinsic happiness or naturally like true happiness. They're constantly changing. All these types of happiness or well-being are malleable, transitive states.
다 되는 예배는 다 기대는 토르와 말은 좀 년바이어나 고사 톱나 저과이어나 내가서 대화를 전해라.
The same holds true in a worldly sense in our lives. Our friends, those that are close to us, once we have friends and people close to us, that's real happiness. We get some level of status, some high position, or some type of a good reputation where our renown is growing. That's true happiness in a worldly sense.
다 비투약이 채도 배점 빼먹을 것은 빼먹었다 배점 빼먹어서 되네. 내가 다당한 쪽을 돌아찬다 타비였어. 이나요? 다 코도 대화 요래. 다다 코 대화 요래.
단단히 여기 말해. So to get those types of things, we go through all sorts of effort, spend all kinds of money, spend all of our resources, do all sorts of things to get these things. Then what happens when we do? Do we really get happiness? Right now we have our character Donald Trump, who's won his great victory. Do you think he's all that happy right now?
Huh? 다코 은혜선 나다 다코 다다다 누마를 해리 뭐라 가세요 그랬어. 누가 비나는 주네가 가르쳐 봐이나 바지키는 쌍무여지 됐어. 다코 가르쳐 버렸으나 코다다 직니 다다그티 톱차로 이나요 다들 대박이 동아리요. 이런 자본주의 동안. 그래와 대나hin 다다다 빼듯이서는 와서다 초, 다 빼앗겨서 치, 마음, 써서 다 하나님께서 코 빼앗겨서 그랬더니 다 직기나 코 빼앗겨서 야구지고 아니 카라 야구, 좋아 야구지는 이 야구지 여섯 만 했어. 다 대접을했어. 지나서 사람 여섯 했어. 내가 살았어. 그 기본이 살았어.
So right now for him probably day by day, he's having more and more problems. Issues are mounting. So yeah, he won. He won the great victory, but that was a very unstable state of happiness. That was clearly a transitive, malleable state of happiness. I won, but then everything that comes along with that now. Rinpoche says he's probably quite unwell. Issues on the outer, inner, and secret levels. He probably eats food, he can't even taste it. Can't sleep. He's probably having all sorts of problems right now. What do you all think? Do you think he's happy, doing well?
딱 지금 토를 지금은 대화 때는 딱 잡아 토. 저번 코 치슈르도 축구 휴르도. 토. 코 축구 휴르도. 딱코 깨달이 친구 휴르 탑소. 고사는 휴르 탑소. 딱코 가세 대화 나와요.
In a worldly sense, he's extremely famous now. He's attained, global renown, extremely wealthy, has now attained this highest status there could be. To me, a status, wealth, fame, and how happy do you think he is? How much well-being and happiness is there in that?
Well, 자 도스레스. 근데 맞아 치르르 세라와. 다 이탐지. 나랑 속다 매바지 그거는 되나? 빼내려와. 아니. 나랑 속 뭐보지 그거는 되나? 나랑 오르고 동아리 봐. 제가 축복지는 대화 용어를 삼바죠. 양 나라한테는 고사 매조를 지금 나라 고사 매도 동안이에요. 고사 통보지 탑는 되네 대화를 쓰더라. 이나요? 여기 되네 축복을 때네요. 양 고조라. 얘는 다 뺏겨서 얘네 대화를 하게 믿어. 가령에서는 다 축복 가서이나 대석에 선비 체도로고도 오라 체도로고도 올라 다 조직인 거는 좀 얘네 싸고요래 소재는 성격제고요래 축복 가서이나 대석에 감축 망와요래 오라 망와요래 그래와 꼬마 잡아도 당와요래 오라 망와도 봐.
So it's really just like that. Generally, we think when you're poor, you have nothing, then you have the suffering of being poor. Suffering of being poor and longing after wealth. If only I had this, if only I had if only I were a rich man. If I were a rich man. Or with a status, lacking status, any type of a state of renown or status. You have the suffering of that and thinking, if I had this state of status, it would be stable. But when we think about it, that's just not the case. Wealth, abundance, doesn't bring happiness. The wealthier you are, the more riches you have, the more worries you have, the more problems can come about. You're wealthy, you have the worries of amassing wealth, retaining wealth, protecting wealth, not losing your wealth. The more you get, the more worry and the more potential for it being lost, stolen, and so forth. Think you're doing it.
Yeah, 다른 좀 그런 짓들이 내가 돼요. 되는 게 이렇게 좀 때문에도 꼭 옛날에 교육으로 되는 줄이 나왔어. 다 되는 말한지 다 되는 거라서 되는 기도한게 얘네 삼사나 빼는 말한 저거 아주 쌈나 대화라고 이제 쌈되고요. 이네요. 야, 더 동화들이 째고. 빼나되는 거는 저 애니 다 타마라서 뭐 짜는 소리들서
타마.
빼는 거저거 다 집에서 간다고 써니 그 대화도 페이스기 요로. 다 대화 거저 대화도 이나요. 이거 뭐가 이거 말아도 동안 침못 째요. 된다고 했는데 다 가르쳐. 빼는 다 말하는 좀. 다 너네 다 코로나 때서도 빼지. 차바 늦어지 동화를 쓰는 거 왔다. 강화될 때는 동화를지 매바지 때는 요 말했잖아. 가시 때는 다다 동화를 되어래. 가시랑 인기지 동화를 되어래. 가시 때는 맞아 빼주셔서 애네 다다 대화를 넘되네요. 뭐 동화를 줄 차대요. 도스케나 나는 저거 오 되네랑 인기 때는 다 빼주셔서 동화를 레더 같아. 참 다 대답을 해서 동아리 다 철도 빼내라. 야 가시 동아리 톨 동아리 말이 도와. 빼내다 대접을. 동아리 톨. 양나 빼차야나. 다 내가 송송하고 있다. 동아리 도라고 얘기 야바이나. 얘네 냐와당 얘네 나랑 좀 따로 다 내가 송따로 동아리 동아리를 봐. 토리가 하나한테 쏘라고 지기나 교회도 가요. 그래봐. 라서다. 그래서 담지나 거기서 애니 양고 다다기 get도 줘서나 양고도 배도서 이런 교회도 가요. 봐. 다 니니 다 제단 말한 쏘고 다 도스.
All these examples pointing out the unstable nature of such perceived happinesses. all of those fit within this category of suffering of change, happiness that's really transitive, changing, unstable. So also sometimes we may, individuals may think that a state or think that something is happiness, is some state of well-being, happiness, bliss. But in actuality, it is suffering, or is something that leads to a tremendous amount of suffering. As well, kind of ignorantly and pridefully thinking, I found my happiness. What you're actually engaging in is the cause for great suffering. Smoking cigarettes, addicted to cigarettes or drugs in particular. You get into drugs and there's really this perception that, oh, I found my happiness. This makes everything all better. But really for that little state of happiness, you're, by doing that, you're engaging in the causes that lead to a tremendous amount of suffering in the future. So things like that happen all the time. Perceiving things as being good, happiness, that are actually causes that lead to greater suffering, or in actuality suffering too. So in brief, in samsara, this, generally speaking, we have the suffering of everything composite, or all-pervasive suffering. As long as you're within the realm of conditioned things, there's no transcendence of suffering. So, so then within that context of suffering pervading all samsara, we have the direct experience of suffering, the feeling of suffering, the experience of suffering as all composite things having the nature of suffering and being malleable, changing. And we have the experience of what we think to be happiness, which is really suffering. So all these different types of ways of recognizing, understanding how suffering comes about or exists within samsara. So the suffering of suffering are the immediate experiences of something awful, or the experience of something, some experience of suffering atop of another type of suffering. Something bad has happened, then on top of that something else happens, which predominates in the three lower realms. So within the 6 realms of existence, we have the 3 lower realms, hell and so forth, which are predominated by this, this type of suffering, the suffering of suffering. And then the higher realms, the God realm and the realms and the human realms, which are predominated by the suffering of change, in particular in the God realm. When the causes for remaining in the divine celestial realms are exhausted, then one falls out of that state of bliss and happiness, which is the one experience of what we could categorize as the suffering of change.
Benedati 동안 찍마 상부 거도 동안 일렉션 요소라. 어라서. 애니 말하는 쪽 베네체스에 애네 relana 중국의 갑라 토라 다동양 베네체스에 되니 베네체스에 애네 자라 자가 고마나 왔다. 베네다 찍고는 찍다. 베네체 화제 동안 다다 여바든 염술은 jorob이 동안. 그래서 tene tena yinge ta pere ke se ke ngara to tsabi che nga to pere ta ke ga na chi la so ba tene chi nga to ta to so ta ma ma mo ji yo wa pere ta ne ma do ba to ba ba do ba to de ne ma da ba o ta ke na yin tene ngara to go mo chi ene chingara to really thola yo es ina da trengaran to go tene da te da jeru da shiachi da jera ke tu da ma to dong ri de 당고 da ma to song song da dong ri chi shu dong ji ni 당고 su da 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 mo song ro ji ni a 당연 송은 나네야. 당연 송 니리니. 당냐와 이다. 이는 것도 틀렸어. 어다 또 쓰죠.
So as human, having attained a human state, and while being a human, it's evident that we have all these different types of suffering. So while being a human being, we can have the experience of the suffering of suffering, which is namely when one situation has arisen, one state of suffering, we're experiencing one state of suffering before that's even over yet. Something else happens to us. We're sick, some kind of illness. We just found out we have some disease, and then somebody robs us and steals some. That's just a simple example of suffering while being a human. You have something bad going on, something else adds on top of it. Then the suffering of change, whatever state of happiness or whatever thing of happiness, well-being that you have is lost, transforms, changes into something else, into a state of suffering, or is just lost. So in particular, well-being, the suffering of a human being is often classified into the 4 states of birth, old age, sickness, and death. But on top of those, there are really all sorts of different types of sufferings that we experience while being people. That are many different classifications, types. We have the suffering of meeting with that which we don't want to meet with. Whatever we don't want to happen, that happens. We have the suffering of not meeting with what we want to meet with, namely not getting what we want. All different types of suffering that are experienced while being people. So today we're focusing on the general explanation of suffering found within samsara. So when we discuss the particular states of suffering, then we progressively go through each of the 6 realms of existence, discussing the particular experiences of suffering in them, starting with the worst. We start from the discussion on the lower realms, from hell to the preta, the hungry ghost realm, to the animal realms.
주로와 파치와거든 켈랭도 이는 딱 맞춰 켈랭한테 됐을 때부터 가시 아주 제가 보고 있어요 말에 아니 다 찍어도 됐어 그냥 나는 좀 나와서 니는 맞아 내겠어요 맞아 내게 나와랬어 그다 찍 얘들은 나가야 맞다 갈마도 기다는데 시간 어디 찍어 차는 거다 찍 나와서 얘가 찍어 차는 거야.
So the first of these realms, the realm of hell, or the hell realms. So most spiritual traditions and religions accept this, or posit there being some type of hell. So we're in harmony in that way. Everybody accepts there's a hell, or most traditions believe in some type of hell. There's one particular difference. Some traditions say that there's some almighty that makes hell. God has created hell or something. In the Buddhist tradition, it's our own karma, our own actions that create hell. It's through our own karma, our own actions that the appearances of hell are experienced. So that's a particular major difference. But we can't say that, generally speaking, most spiritual traditions do accept, are the same in saying that there is a hell.
야, 남부는 해서미나 같은 참. 그러나다 나한테 가르세. 교조구나. 가르송으로서는 아니 냐바서 스즈버레스. 아니 메트서 스파마레스. 그래서 현다 요마레스. 나란 저 랑기다 좀 가르사. 얘네 딕빅이 샘지. 딕빅이 샘지 초백이 나와요 거요. 어두스.
So it's a particular unique feature to the presentation of hell in the Buddhist tradition. Within the Bodhicharyavatara way of the Bodhisattva, it's asked, who made hell? Who ignites the fires of hell? It's none other than the deluded appearances that arise based on the power of the negative mind. They are nothing other than the deluded appearances of the negative mind.
Ini yang ngaram sogo umbada to kashi nawa. Ini yang ngaram sogo 지 mata resiyos. Ini kan ngaram sogo sawo 사이고 원마. 근데 지금 럼바다 부치도 양 전쟁이 되는 지금 ngaram sogo 배 이어서. 지금 전쟁이 돼 양 큰데 이어서. 그래서 공단을 선언에 송구였어. 냐가 가래 지금 와서 저기였어.
That being said, also in some Buddhist texts, in particular in the Abhidharma texts, it's described where hell actually is, that hell is some place, some realm under the earth. You dig down, it's a particular number of levels. It's like under the earth you will find hell. And other texts as well talk about the specifics of hell. I heard text now, Words of My Perfect Teacher, describes the particular realms of hell.
근데 이나야 다양한 뜻이야 가시들서 어다 뜻서 당시 프로베 남아서 맞은 물람이라고 해서 물람은 그냥 와서 가서 물람다고 해서 어떻게 해서
And then in some texts it describes these appearances, all deluded appearance. These deluded appearances are just like a dream, appeared just like a dream.
다 들으서도 아니요. 다 가시게 되게 그냥 알아서 기대는 뜻었던지 엠바 딱 걸려고 제. 나 소생에 대해서 양 물음으로 진지 제대로 제지 시험이 좋았어. 딱 와서 우리 물음 따고 생긴다. 근데 지금 나와니 시해도 값어. 다다 맞아. 뜻었던지 나와 찍어 차대요. 알았어.
Sometimes in those, you read such explanations as that. The lower realms, hell is just dream appearance. Then you can have this thought that, our world right now is like stable, real. But those hell realms, those are just a dream. Those aren't real. You have this like dichotomy. Right now is real, stable. Hell, the lower realms, are somehow less. Really, one's own appearance is all dreamlike. Being the same in being one's own appearances, the experience one has. It's the same in that regard, right?
네, 그러나 얘는 말한 속에 서봐. 나와서도 가래라고 그랬잖아. 나도 소소 안에 나와. 소소를 리드 빼는 말한 속 미들래. 나도 때문에 리 찍어 쌓여서 저기 나도 나왔더니 빼듯이 지 강과이나 셴이나 방글 르이나 되는 말한 속을 니나 찍어 통도 와. 이나양 생계 옛날에 야 맞아 나한테라고 찍어 내린다.
맞죠.
맞아 나한테 찍어 내린다. 그러나 맞아 산다고 얘를 차이하나 춘다고 얘를 차이하나 가시 그 고란 속에 하나라고 가시 그 고란 속에 맨날 살라고 좀 가시 내라 가시 그 사마라고 알아봐. 얘네 내나게 그 맨날 알아서 늘라고 될 때가 있나. 맞아 말하는 게 되니 나와라. 맞아 늘래. 이해를. 이나야 말하는 속을 늘게라. 심지어 뭐 프라마도 내는 거. 대소가 가르쳐 거래. 내 늘했어 거 말아. 커져라기 니다. 용하다. 근데 찾아 말하는 속 그냥 이렇게 제거.
So appearances. When we talk about appearances, what really are we meaning? So everyone has their own individual appearances, their own individual experience of whatever it is that is being experienced. It's never definitive. It's based on one's individual karma that you experience your own individual appearances. So there's the collective karma of us as being human beings. Now, based on our human being karma, we experience the human realm here. The realm of being a human being, where we have a house, our body, our trees and so forth. We experience the appearances of being a human being. But those appearances are not definitively true and are different for different sentient beings. The way different things appear to different beings is completely different, contingent upon their karmic actions. Take whatever it is that appears to us in a certain way, appears differently to different beings. Earth, water, and so forth. Take earth for an example. Earth to some beings is where they live. They live in the earth. It's food for other beings. They perceive it as being food. Maybe a better example, our own body. For us as a human being, this right here is me. This is my body. But within this body, how many hundreds of thousands or millions or billions of little critters, bugs, are living within this body somewhere? So for all of those little bugs in, here somewhere, do they also perceive this as being like Luke's body, my body? No, not at all. It's their house, their shelter, it's their universe, their country, their thing. So just pointing out that appearances are not contingent upon the type of being you are and your karmic propensities.
야, 빼나, 아니, 맞춰기, 나와라. 진짜 가라앉고 쪽 빠져서다, 가르사. 정우 휴 나와디. 야, 생계 게나서, 코란서 왜 나와? 야, 코란신이라고 지, 대라고지. 너 빼나다, 가라앉으라고 지, 나다, 등산라고 지, 빼나 도매와지. 근데 축장고 제리 나와. 다, 추천 먹고 내 투상이다. 근데 싫어 그러가. 이나야 샤파 깔장 찾아도 이노나 나도 냐돼서 콧대들이야. 계산 딱히 가서 나만 민다봐. 그냥 가서 기스고 나만 민다봐 여봐. 소화 민다봐 여봐. 옛날에 넣었어.
Another example of our individual appearances not being like definitive, different for different beings. An example of being extremely cold. So right now it's getting colder. So now if we were to go swimming naked in some lake, some freezing water, it'd be freezing, right? We'd die like in a few minutes. But fish live under the ice in lakes, happily swimming about. Their experience, the individual appearance and experience of that appearance is totally different. It's not definitive.
제가 양 알아서 빼는 레전 나와래서 시행과 레전 나와. 빼는 알아서 드는 거 라마들이 망고지 샹도서 통발해. 빼나 드는 알아서 나사는 거만 라마지 샹.
샤.
희소. 고도 민도를 경을 못 생겼네.
민주ling 총.
좀. 근데 코로나 다 빠지겠어래. 애니 마샤가 공나 이마 눈이라고니 내 신간 맞고 통고요 말해. 신간 이마 눈이 뭐라. 그 내가 지금 신간 가den게 당고고 가den서 이바 때니 거서 갔어. 내가라도 그 리기 와서 리기 나와도 세서라. 리기 나와도 세서도 리드 세서도 나와도 내가랑 신감 차르고도 마도 양 와서 내야 양 신감 되지 이게 나고 파 와서 그 잡로 어떻게 내가 같이 레민도 그러나 하게 나와 내가 지금 신감 와서 통도 그러나 난 나와도 와서 다 내가 지금 말해 다 저다 패 신감의 패레민도 그치 와서 유로나 와 내가 지금 말해 나서 그러나 내가 지금 말해 놨더니 내가 지금 가요 그랬어 제자가 이제 와서 신 헬때 와서 나와 생인데 리스크이 모두 아니 지금 이제 여기서 대화 찍기는 그거에서 말했어.
Our various karmic appearances, whatever it is we experience, whatever it is that appears as our own individual karmic experience at the time. Relating to this, Rinpoche says he's been with many lamas when they pass away. One in particular, in Lhasa, he was with Lojong Rinpoche when he was when he passed away. And for 2 weeks before he passed away, everything appeared to him as the pure realms. Everything was the land of great bliss, Dewa Chen. First, the pure realm of Ganbin, the pure realm of, I don't know, endowed with delights or something. But everything was appearing as the pure realms for him. All his appearances. The karmic appearances of, or the karma leading to the appearances of being a human were exhausted, gone. And because of that, everything was being experienced as the pure realms right here, right now. It's not that there's this place is to be left behind and the pure realms are in some far-off place. The Dewa Chen is some long way away that we have to, leave right here and now and go get it somewhere else. And when he was experiencing this, he was like telling everybody, I'm in Dewa Chen, this is Dewa Chen. And Rinpoche and everyone was saying, no, you're not in Dewa Chen, you're in Lhasa. You haven't died yet, you haven't gone anywhere, you're here in Lhasa, quit talking crazy. And he would respond with, well, if this isn't Dewa Chen, then where is it? If this isn't the land of bliss, where could it be? Anyway, point being that appearances are not, definitive. There's not one single appearance that can be had. They're all malleable, all based on our own karma at the time.
얘네 얘네 레지 선다 답변나 말하는 쪽에서 이나양 다다가 말하는 쪽 규트인지 나와디 다다가 좀 나와나지 얘네 지금 와서 냐와 생긴데 소야 요 말이잖아 내가 쓰시고 말아왔어 야미 후만 와서 쓰고요 와서 정한다 저런 전화서 꼭 말했어 하여 요 말이 남들 보고요 그랬어 뭐라 가르쳐야 했더니 냐와 요 말했어 다 와서 그냥 냐와 사고 그랬어 냐와 요 말했어 요나 가와도 땡겼어 오늘 마두가 점지게 내가 처음에 왔어
So because of our own current experience, perception, our current karmic appearances of being a human, just based on that, we can't say definitively that there's no hell, there's no something else. Just merely by the fact of not seeing something, it doesn't follow that you can say it definitively is not so. This was kind of debated back when Rinpoche was in prison. The Chinese prison guards kind of tease the Tibetans and say, there's no hell, there's no pure realms, there's no heaven. We have airplanes, you fly up into the sky, there's no heaven up there. There's a hell, your texts say hell's under the earth somewhere, we've dug down there. There's no hell down there. There's a hell somewhere, show us, where's this hell you're talking about? But, like, you stupid Tibetans, how could you think that? But again, just by not seeing something, you can't say that it's definitively not so.
야, 얘네 다 말한 쪽이야, 빼나 다 나 쪽에 티. 얘네 약함 생해도 소야. 여매 들어와. 다 지랑 얘기 양지 요하들 매도와. 내가 맞지 아까 제지래도 된거도. 내가 따서 대해서 상담. 봐. 강들이 영서와. 다다 말한 쪽 아니 다 약함도 해도 가서 보통 사고 원이 말을 봐. 这是切的肉是吧？这是这个，你看这，变得单样是要什么接着嘛，写个多啊？但那这个差的，他妈的说了嘛，他出去的， 근데 지금 가서 짝색이 간 것 같은데 열었어요. 나도 와. 지키는 말하면서 대양 가서 맞아 약골이지. 다 대래 말했어요. 시금에 와. 배는 말하면서 사고를 말때 때는 놓았어요. 열어봐. 말하면서 막 사고 원래 따뜻한 거 가서 초주 때는 가서 지금 열어봐요.
Sang-yoga.
제 가르쳐요.
Lava.
다 배는 대다워 지 가르쳐는 연 대다워 지키는 말했어요. 시금에도. 다 배는 연구를 와. 다 배는 다 내가 다 됐었는데 그냥 레이스라고 매다. 배는 성공 따고 있는 때 배는 다 되지도 와. 다 때를 빼봐 이나스. 다 되기 추원을 말아봐도 벌써 때는 차고 빼는 다 차고기를 막 하나 통도 와. 다 때서 대서 그 정을 열어 왔더니 뒤에 차도 들어대는 저. 다 탐에게 나와 근데 빼는 딱 벗어 가서 빼는 딱 벗어 쫙 초주도 도도들 놓아. 초주 도도지 올라 초주 방법. 빼는 가서 막 시험하라고 요래 땡땡이 요래. 가서 사고 오늘 rumba 막 거는 거는 가만 초주고 뒤에 나오더니 와서 쫙 큰거서 뭐쫙 큰거서 뭐 배우면 쫙 르고 나는 초주고 견진 요래서도 답변은 내가 얘는 강시 니네 가서 가대변에 다 내라고 있나지 거기서 내려오지 말이지 라투고 넣어서 빼나 이 말하는 감동이 얘가 습관 시행에 통화서 와 이 말하는 사람이나 대학교 가서 지키는 예스 그래서 딱 말하면서 네 말하면서 끼트는 게 얘기 맞으면 이게 통고 열어와 내 나한테 끼트는 게 얘기를 아니 들어봐지나 내가 이 초월했어
So, Rinpoche has kind of noticed one way of thinking about whether or not there's hell. Not saying it's definitive evidence or something, but one way you can think about hell that he's kind of pondered and makes some kind of sense, at least fits with the Buddhist explanations, teachings on hell. Again, hell in our text, it talks about the stages of hell, in particular the 8 stages of the hot hells, the 8 hot hells, being progressively hotter, like each later one is hotter than the last, culminating in a house of molten metal with no walls and no doors. You're the beings trapped in a house of molten metal. So also with the earth, we have these different levels of the earth, right? And they progressively get hotter as you dig down in the earth, getting hotter and hotter, and there's a molten core. When you just look at this diagram of the earth, just like the teachings on the 8 stages of hell, getting hotter and hotter down to their central core without walls and windows, this single core of moltenness. It's exactly what the earth is too. It gets hotter and hotter down to the central core, right? Not saying it's definitive evidence or anything, or even that I've heard it from anywhere else. Rinpoche said he's just noticed this, and it's kind of an interesting way to think about it, to contemplate on the potential existence of hell. And the world for us now, how we perceive things is our collective karmic appearance. Through our own collective karma, there's appearances that are collectively experienced. So we have this collective experience or appearance of this existence of the world that has we perceive right now as being hotter and hotter and hotter as you examine down inside, so that the experience of that could be different for other collective karmic experiences possible, maybe so.
nyarvi semjen yana minji mini semjen rawoji tinipa dusa go rawoji oguya ma ko pa manda wo yomare
Parma.
aba amanda wo yomare ba
Las.
ko zujele ko semje rayin tinichele ko 다 내가 여기 나와는 셔터 원마도 코 대답을 지금 넣어. 제가 그 주시를 와. 배나 애네 냐와다 파생해서 배나 근데 지금 알아서 그녀를 제가 대박 하시. 배나 알아서 근데 송여로. 배나 고당 까와. 고당 까와 강비를 고당 까와다. 배나 그저강 대선다고 라요. 코랑 샘대가 인데 되나. 네? 나그 딱히 되는 거기서 애네.
Signore.
데레가 코랑게 샘다고지 셴. 코 생겨나 말해.
Las.
얘나야 코랑게 지 꼬르지오게 그니까 초만다고 동한다고 양한데 가지 유고요. 배나 다니. 데레라 보이나? 딱 배나 가대 여는 리더우치 레 여스나 무슨 말이 무슨 다보냐. 샘게 갖고서 코랑게 다 리더우치 샘다고지 쇼쇼고요. 가대 드니 리더우치라 갖고서 말해 세나야. 나지 방이 상 뭐지 여기 근데 이 조사에 상도 이나야 내가 파를 또 때려서 같이 생게 여매 따파라고 해서 되지 뭐라 이 인지 미니 다고 생게지 이나 호텔에 인지 미니 때려지 보고요 말 강아들 때 그런 소속이 샘게 때려 다 고속 가서지 토되고 와다 때려지 말아서 때려지 가라는 것더니 샘게 쇼되고 알아봐도 인지 미니 때 때려지 요 말아 대학들이 말하는 게 들어가지 있네. 대단하게 말하는 남자가 있지. 다 내게 나와. 대탐지 있고 내게 나와. 얘네 나서 내 내게 나와 있는데 대단한 거 나서 아주 통제 여자지 알아. 그래서 이제 가게 나기 그 주바라고 찍지 시에거나 근데 얘 초월에 상도 내가 얘 초월에 상도
So then you can have the reply to this is, well, the beings in hell, they're sentient beings. They're, where are they exactly? Show me these, sentient beings. Hell beings are unique. Hell beings are born through what we call, they have a magical birth. They're not born from parents. They don't have a mother and father that lead to their birth. They have a magical birth, and they're really can be or often described as like mental beings, not sentient beings with forms as we normally would understand them to be. In the descriptions of the ephemeral hells, we have descriptions of hell realms being beings existing in all sorts of different things. Beings existing in doors or columns holding up houses, inside inanimate things, where there isn't a physical, tangible body, but their mind is trapped in there, experiencing whatever various sufferings based on their own karmic appearances they can be experiencing there. So likewise, so in that way, then this, it's possible to say that mental beings of hell beings could be existing within the center of the earth, in the hot molten core of the earth. We couldn't definitively say that is not the case. The experience of hell is predominantly this mental experience, the experience of the mind, experience through the power of the mind. So in these descriptions of hell existing, hot hells existing underneath the earth, then maybe this fits quite perfectly with that. Maybe you could understand it in that way. So in line with our own collective karmic appearances of what appears to us and the world as we know it, then it fits in line with that. How we understand how the world appears to us, hotter in the core, it definitely could be that way.
For example, when we are describing the minor hell rooms,
What?
minor hell rooms, 니체와 녀와 깨지 시드 상발로 보통 가와당 탁바 딘들레 셈젠진네 요스라 미네 양아서 디 통기 민도와
라.
디데 저거인 디지 용미스 민도와세 디르비스 딜라
So,
뭐는 나와 여러 뭐는 나와디 요는 니디 뭐는 나와
내가 드니까 내가 샘때 쇼미 그럼 생계는 요새고요 만다 디나 코랑그 샘때 되는 쇼 상호지도 가서 코랑한테 차비가 나와 해 정지도 그 샘때 쇼를 양때 생계는 지금 무슨지 그래 어떻게 시행해요 말
So again, this, as the scriptures describe the ephemeral hells being beings existing within doors or columns of houses or in various different inanimate things, they're not being described as some sort of tangible sentient being that could be actually seen through the power of their mind. They're existing there in those things. It's not something that you can see directly. So because we have those such explanations of, intangible mental beings experiencing hell, then it would also fit that they could be, in the molten hot core of the earth without being, able to be seen.
다 가르 트레이너라는 쪽이다. 이러고 있다. 지금 되는 말하는 쪽이다. 가르사 못 방거에서는 강원도에다 유대 가르에서는 말하는 쪽 시행을 해. 시행 그 되는 다 말하는 쪽 빼려다다 쪼고다다 아니 다 네. 문제라고 다 시행을 해. 아니 다 너한테 다 말하는 쪽을 아니 그냥 변하는 참 대나긴 당가라는 거 빼는가 아니 당이 다스 다做的 당가라는 거 집하다 공부하게 동안 그러봐 아니 대나긴 다 전로세도 가서 다 지금하라는 거 빼지네 직 싸워라 소바다 다 그래서 다 맞아 무슨 통제가 봐 어라서 다 대답을 되는 말하는 거 때문에 다 야로하기다 들어라서 답부터 소스 애니 다 주대 가르쳐 버렸으면 와서 또 자식도 또 먹도 차야. 와서 다 사람들이 와서 그 주를 닫아 그 너자기도 또 무슨 와서 그 주를 이거야. 다 와서 그 주게 네 매바지 주게 네 되는 말은 좀 매나 아니 코이요 코랑 연애 와서 되네. 와서는 되게 되네. 되게 야 리나는데 셔도 말아 셔도 말아 이 리나는 생이가 대때 땅가랑 주고 빼놨더니 내가 손손게 생겨서 솔라 삼목 당제 제니 아니 대탐제는 이게 보면 서로 말한 주고 유지 너샤해당 또 먹대 솔라 삼목 당제 해그 jut에서 다다 말한 주고 파 애니 어느 게 저자고이나 와서는 뭐는 없는 데로 이런 거 말아 왔어. 내가 가서 뵙지스리 이런 거 말했어.
판네.
저들 마바나 알아도 빼는 알아서 뵙지스리 따라와. 와서도 치바게 나사티 말하나 와서 매기 세고도 통들어. 저들 와서 치박 껴. 내 나이 와서 배 다다더니 리도부 천한테 가르쳐서는 와서 명문 거죠. 대때 와서 랑게들이 명문대서라 생계 연달아 인계게 랑주고 명문대서라 빠졌다. 근데 그래서 담게 다 빼려. 와서 찍고 담지 마세요. 생계 담게 다 빼려서 애니 가르세. 너 자식이다. 또 먹고서 뭐 담게 되더니 집. 다 준도 자기다. 좀 먹고 되니 와서 요당 잘지. 근데 주변에 송부 코와 담게 똥을 효삼하지. 대답없이 똥토바시 내게 있는 냠내 제게 예삼.
네, 유당자, 유대자.
야, 다 생계에다 탐지. 근데 용하는 저거다 빼다 애니 독선에서 탐지다. 최제제. 애니 다 주변에 내 송도 똥을 탐지더니 트렌드 때도 내와지. 토바시 나게 냠내 제게 있는 제 무슨 담자지. 대답은 정말 쇼섬께는 뭐는지 알아? 아니 대답을 지켜는 쏘았다. 어다 도스래. 나들이 가서 십차지 계단을 넘어서 있는다. 그렇게 되지.
So for today, how are we to contemplate, think about all this? So we've been discussing hell. So the primary cause that leads to hell is anger, the afflictive emotion of anger. That's the result of engaging in actions based on anger, that the appearances of hell come about. And just like that, the various different appearances of the other lower realms, the realms of the hungry ghost, the predator realms, and the animal realms, where various different sufferings are experienced. The sufferings of the predator, the hungry ghost realms, primarily the sufferings of great hunger and thirst, and then the sufferings of animals, various different sufferings of animals being eaten by each other and so forth. And all of those we can directly see. We've seen those. We're directly aware of those. So contemplating on the sufferings of the lower realms and then contemplating on the causes that lead to those, namely the afflictive emotions, the three poisons of anger, desire, and ignorance, or dullness of mind. So these are the causes that lead to the rebirth, the causes that lead to birth in those realms, to the experience of the karmic appearances of those realms. And those causes we have right now in our own mind. We have desire, anger, ignorance, dullness of mind in our mind right now. If you don't have those, then such karmic appearances as the lower realms can never come about. So to abandon those, to be rid of those, is the goal. So thinking about this in our contemplation, our Lojong, then we contemplate on the beings that are experiencing the sufferings of the lower realms and give rise to cultivate compassion for such beings. And then also investigating in our own mind, when have we engaged in, and how do we have the same causes that lead to that? Where's the anger, desire, ignorance within our own mind? And then to abandon those, to relinquish those causes from our own mind, relinquish the afflictive emotion. Then if that's done, no such appearances can come about. It's somewhat analogous to someone with jaundice, the Tibetan often used example of the individual with jaundice, where everything is perceived with a yellow tint to it. You see the white conch shell as being yellow. But as soon as the fault of jaundice, the condition of jaundice is removed, then they see everything clearly again. So likewise, through the faults of the afflictive emotions, the various different appearances of the six realms of existence come about. So to contemplate in this way, giving rise to compassion towards the beings of the lower realms and investigating the potential causes that we possess in our own mind that may lead to arising in the lower realms. So contemplating in this way and then making aspiration prayers, supplication prayers, and giving rise to a vow, a commitment. Namely, that the prayer that may all the afflictive emotions in my own mind stream and in the mind streams of all beings be eliminated, be completely gone. And may all beings reach the stage of stable happiness, permanent bliss, free of the suffering of all suffering of the lower realms. So we make these heartfelt prayers, aspiration, supplication prayers, and then on top of that, the vow, the commitment that I will engage in actions to do this. I will personally lead all beings out of suffering and eliminate their afflictive emotions and suffering. So we didn't have time to go into great detail on all the various different realms, but that's kind of the process to go through. That's the way to contemplate it, engage in the mind training for these realms of existence.
이런 게 같이 못 찍지. 같이 비슷한 거 하면서. 다 빼나. 저 년와 이다도 저는 저 생각 삼도 동도. 이내에 대해서 전부 내가 손도 대라고 말고 요래. 그래서 빼나 다 빼나 좀 막 잡대거나 막 잡게 되는 답답해. 이제 세례조도 또. 다 말, 좀 생해도 소라 가르치면 냐비들 레사고요. 그러면 그저 시장 보니다. 시장 건강에다 가르쳐 있는 생도 봐. 다 생해도 소라 때나 얘는 다 가서 거기서 보도 빼는 매주 당 되는 가서 속에 나가 거기 차르고 빼는 가서 소라 다 상호당나 얘는 가서 민재지나 그러봐 다 대소 가서 무슨도 지금 알아서 보더니 초와 영토도 봐. 다 되는 시리아라고
Syria.
뭔가 망보니 망보지 고도 딱 와서 싫어도 목이 하나 살리면
Syria? Double?
Somali.
Somalia.
야 소말리아라고 소말리아라고 뭐 빠뜨리더다 그래서 좀 무슨 일하라고 그러와 다 대소 잡을라 근데 되는 알아 좀 사모다 다 대소 그도 은인이라고 보도 이다라고 그래 대소 담기를 지다 알아 좀 문제지 대소 그 동안에 사모다 봐 다 도시에 지는 대담기를 다 알아 좀 노조잖아 내가 보고 뭐 이제 소다
One more important way to also be engaging in your Lojong mind training practice relating to the suffering of samsara. So right now in our world today, we have many different examples, ways to think about hellish situations just like the experience of Preta, the hungry ghost realms. So in the world today, we have lots of wars being waged. Wars being waged where that suffering we can see directly. It's evident. So for us, we can contemplate on that, take that as our object of mind training. Contemplate on that suffering, the great murder, the killings going on, the shooting of bombs, all this that's going on. Also, in particular, thinking about the beings that are doing the killing and focus on giving rise to compassion towards them. The people killing others on the battlefield and so forth are, what are they doing? They're, through their own anger, avarice, are killing other beings, amassing the karma that where else could it lead but to hell for them. So thinking about the whole situation of war in that way, contemplating on it in that way, then we really we can give rise to a real feeling, a real transformation in the mind, a real sense in our mind of this. And then also in other parts of the world, like in Syria, where there's no food, a famine going on in Syria, contemplating on that and the suffering being experienced by people there and in other places as well. Then really it's just like they're in the hungry ghost realms. So we can contemplate on all these real situations that we can see right now as our means for Lojong, for mind training. Contemplating on those situations, giving rise to compassion, recognizing the reality of those situations. And then if we do that, Rinpoche says it's very good. It's like a good opportunity for us to transform our mind, and then to conclude that with strong various aspiration prayers and supplication prayers for those beings.
That's all.
Tua?
Oh. Yeah. Next week.
Anybody out here? Questions?
Rinpoche clearly described the suffering of change, composite suffering, and the suffering of suffering. Could he please describe natural suffering?
No.
That was the most described today.
가르쳐다. 콜비를 랑신 담지 고스도 동할 동안.
So in brief, the nature of samsara is suffering. Just that there's no transcending suffering. The nature of samsara is suffering.
다다 내가 놈들 저도 담지 고고도 가서 근데 동할 경우도 때 담지 랑신 동안 예비 땅에서. 랑신 동안 때에서 되네. 고 얘는 여러분들가 내가 놈들 좋아. 와서 되네 랑신 다 되는 거 봤어 랑신.
So the like ignorantly thinking this is true bliss right now, and losing that state of happiness through whatever conditions that changes become some state of suffering. Then that right there shows this like natural suffering or like innate suffering. That the nature of samsara itself is suffering. That there's nothing, no stable happiness. I think this is happiness, and then something else happens that's lost, transformed. There's nowhere outside this nature of suffering. Whatever happiness is had is malleable. That's the natural suffering.
And there's another question. If beings in other realms can't practice Dharma, how do they ever become liberated or brought into a higher realm?
Draw the group in nine draw shamba dezoki che drubyaki gokap tane mena dene rig dele yar doyaki kandres jogiana.
토르기네스 간데스 레비오스라고.
Kandres lebi.
다 나랑 좀 빼는 되네. 나서 되네. 뭐가 뭐고요. 왔다. 나랑 좀 찍. 나서 빼나. 아니 다
예제니 알레브로.
얘들 고속 간세 버고 다 나랑 좀 뜻은 뭐고요. 빼는 다 나랑 좀 개와 용고요를 뭐 개와 용고를 많이 있어. 이네 슉 쳐대 안 보내 주고 와. 슉 치슈대. 이네 얘가 좀 내고 와. 빼는 와서 미치게 되니 미치들 내가 뭐고야. 고요를 대도 이거를 야고요를 두개 먹어. 두개 되냐 저가를 내일 조사를 되냐. 근데 얘가 돼서 그냥 고속 간세를 내리 해놔야 돼 주고 와. 뭐야. 이거 되네.
So for beings, we have all sorts of actions amassed. There's all sorts of virtue, non-virtue that's amassed. Whatever is strongest at the time is being experienced. That's the experience of the realm you're in. Then once that is exhausted, through the exhaustion of that given karma, then a different realm is experienced.
If your mind is overwhelmed by suffering, what means can you use to overcome that?
Tene ranki sem dungal ki zelgi nun bayina, wangdu do bayina. Mebo zoya ki taushe yagochi karere.
동하고 와도 좋아이나? 되니? 동할 때는 해요 말았어.
람케르지야레데.
되네. 동할 때는 해요 말았어. 동할 때도 도도지요 말았어. 대양 말한 쪽은 동해 봐시래. 대대 되네 빼는 말한 쪽 애네 대나 되네 고도파 남들체 빼는 장축지 세미나인가 인계이나인가 동이이나인가 하래게이나야 동할 때서 봐. 닝도블에 요르투브레 동할 때서 애네 대화에 요르투브레
Ningtopki gyurtugi.
닝도블에 요르투브레 애네 대화에 요르투브레 장축지 세미나에 요르투브레 한달다 동할 때서 담지 이게 들어가지 요 말이에요. 근데 장축지 세미나 남천지스
So there's no suffering that is actually truly existent. There's no truly established thing, a tangible thing that is suffering. Thinking that there is this actual suffering, it's a thing that's existent, That's just another negative concept, another negative thought to have. So whatever experience you're having, an experience of suffering, then you can take it as the path, is to be taken on the path, through various different means, through the power of bodhicitta, through the training in emptiness, through compassion, through the power of one's mind. You can transform whatever experience of suffering, can be transformed into a state of happiness or well-being. So namely, through the power of bodhicitta, of the precious mind of enlightenment, to take that experience as the path. That's how to do it. No more, that's enough. I'm done.
That's done. Okay. And then there was a question. I don't think the suffering of samsara was posted, and so we'll have to
Suffering of samsara.
The prayer.
Oh, yeah.
So I'll have to post the prayer for the people on the webcasts. They can have that.
As to the Buddhist fourth teaching about path, is there just one path, or can each sentient being have its own path?
Each person, or like each class of being?
Well, each individual.
Lam say lam chikboyina yamena samchen soso lam soso layang yina.
lam said tabla.
So what we call path means method or skillful means. So understanding it in that way, then there's all sorts of different methods or skillful means that are available. So in the Buddhist tradition, we have the breakdown of the three vehicles. The three vehicles which are based on the level of one's courage, or literally the power of one's mind or power of one's heart. So we have these different vehicles, these different paths, and basically it comes down to, based on one's own individual disposition or composition, there are various different skillful means, or a different path for you. Various different antidotes to be applied. Just like with being sick, there are all sorts of different sicknesses you can have. Different degrees, strengths of sickness, illness, or different types of sickness. So then likewise there are many different medicines for those different types of illness. So the Dharma, the path, is just like that.
I guess most humans remember times when they've been very angry, whatever. So, as we get on the Buddhist path, of course, we regret that. We vow not to repeat it. We may have glimpses of emptiness and understand that you're not solid, so it's not necessary. But so, are those things? Does that absolve some of the karma of those angry moments of the past? Or do we have to go to hell to resolve it?
미나 룸 왕교 콘도 왕교기 네캅 데서 나서 자는 렌투기 그래. 근데 데서 드네 근데 겨바 계기요래. 겨바 계 근데 some damcha 양열 사원에 양열 마체하기 damcha 다오 샤기요래. 근데 직체나 통반니 기 독삼만 독가 동기요래 랑신 데마만 두벤 네캅 임바데 동기요래. 근데 탑시 데서 라테네 근데 삭베레 공도 랑게 삭베레데 se drogiyuna, dark drogiyuna, yamena ngatu da doing nyawala,
야,
ngepardu drogore.
야, 대 저런 것은 다다도 저런 거 시에도 그래서 이나들은 세로 콜레스니도 코드니 저도 때는 중요로 와. 대 답지 답에는 저런 것들이 가르쳐 다다 년보 그랬더니 톱소나 레이드서 세로 그래서 세바 마세 것도 레이드서 지가 공간이 따붙는 레이드서 하면 그 용으로 레이코 라인을 들어보면 하코는 라인을 들어봐요 하코서는 되는데 근데 장점지 생계적이게 깔바를 쌓게 대답지 양을 나섰더니 정으로고요. 행가서 로고 말했어. 냐람.
So yes, what you described, by doing those things, it exhausts that karma. So what we call karma, actions, karma arises based on various causes and conditions. It's composite, it arises based on causes and conditions. So by applying antidotes like the ones you described, then those causes and conditions exhaust or clear away that karma. In particular, through the practice of emptiness. Emptiness, which is the direct seeing of karma having never actually truly existed. Seeing that karma itself is not truly established. By seeing that's the best method that eliminates, in an instant, purifies, eliminates all sorts of karma. As the scriptures say, through one moment of giving rise to bodhicitta, the precious mind of enlightenment, the negativity, the karma of many eons is purified. So, yes, there's no need to go to hell. You don't have to go to hell. Some shot.
그래서 tamche sepa ye tomna ye be dana pamse ke kana che palam tukwa ye sebe tsole jowa ho jamba pale je
Page 12.
undo sambo te an te shin ye te ta ku ye se sa ta lo chi ye wa te ta tamche ha tu zon ji be ye wa tamche ke ma ma cha tu ma te ta ke sa wa te ku ka sa pa chi je
This very moment for the people and nations of this earth. May not even the names disease, famine, war, and suffering be heard, but rather may pure conduct, merit, wealth, and prosperity increase, and may supreme good fortune and well-being always rest.
That's all now.
Loban.
Dojima yomarsmunda.
Yumare, right?
Lagumare.
Lagure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. No Lojong next Sunday. For all of you out there.
No, there is Lojong, but no class.
Oh.
Every day you have Lojong.
Lojong on your own.
Loban corrected me, for if you didn't hear him out there in the internet world. Of course there's Lojong next week. There's Lojong every day. But Rinpoche will not be here to teach next Sunday. Or this Tuesday for Gyaltse Lachlan.
Are we doing? Do we have homework to read any more chapters?
근데 나도 가르쳐. 근데 배쳐서 되는 비치스. 야, 아니 아까 제마라. 야, 제마라. 근데 대체 homework 때문에 다다되는 아니 먼저 다다돼. 제가 이해스 다다돼. 콜베도 할 때랑 이해스가 되는 다른 거도 네, 로마 다 제마는 다도 얘가
So the homework is to do our Lojong on this chapter. We'll continue on this, so don't need to read anything new. We only got into the lower realms today, so there's much more to go to discuss the suffering of samsara. So just Lojong this week, next week, all on the suffering of samsara. Just continue with it.
얘네 장초 비슷한 마스고 인게 마스고 믹스할 때는 트레인다고 보험는 때는 가서 뒤쳐버리는 왔더니요. 미스 봤더니 슉 버리면서.
So meditating, continue in this opportunity to continue meditating, cultivating bodhicitta, compassion in this way. It's very good, and also the particularly auspicious or fortunate occasion of today too, that we were able to meet and contemplate on, meditate on, learn of bodhicitta, compassion. It's wonderful.
하소